Good Sunday morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Maria Bartiromo. Joining us exclusively straight ahead on Sunday Morning Futures this morning, House Freedom Caucus Chairman Mark Meadows is here. He told President Trump his members would have the president's back over a partial government shutdown. Republican Senator David Perdue on when this stalemate might end. Plus, also coming up, Democratic Congressman David Cicilline on his party's pending investigations into the Trump administration, and Republican John Ratcliffe on what happens now to all the GOP probes into the FBI and the DOJ. Plus, General Jack Keane is here on the fallout from the Mattis resignation. And my Christmas conversation with New York Archbishop Cardinal Timothy Dolan as we look ahead on Sunday Morning Futures right now. And Americans get a partial government shutdown for Christmas. It will continue until at least Thursday of this upcoming week when the Senate has its next session. The big stumbling block in negotiations is funding the president's border wall, with the president demanding $5 billion to fund it. While Democrats continue to say no, Nancy Pelosi says it's immoral. This morning, President Trump taking to Twitter to write this: the only way to stop drugs, gangs, human trafficking, criminal elements, and much else from coming into our country is with a wall or a barrier. Drones and all of the rest are wonderful and lots of fun, but it is only a good old-fashioned wall that works. President Trump had a lunch meeting with conservative lawmakers yesterday about border security, and one of those lawmakers in attendance is my first guest this morning. He told the president he would have his back if it came to this. North Carolina Congressman Mark Meadows is with us. Joining us for an exclusive interview this morning is a member of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee and the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus. Mr. Chairman, it's good to have you on the program this morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Maria, great to be with you. Thanks so much.
First, give us a status check. Where are we in terms of these negotiations, Congressman? What are the sticking points now?
Well, I think the sticking point is really that Nancy Pelosi is driving most of this negotiation. You would think it would be Chuck Schumer, but I can tell you, based on conversations I've had as recent as this morning, it seems like Nancy Pelosi is actually the leader, the minority leader in the Senate. And so they've come at an impasse. This is all about trying to make sure that Donald Trump does not secure the border. And it's really more out of their dislike for this president than really about the communities that they are really should be upholding to make sure that they're safe.
Well, I think this is a really important point that you're making, because this is supposed to be about border security. And the Democrats always say we are for border securities, and yet we haven't seen any votes yes on ending sanctuary cities, on voting for Kate's law, on the border wall. So I mean, there's the only other one thing you could think about what this means, and they just don't want the president to fulfill another campaign promise.
Well, you're exactly right, Maria. And I think the other part of that is every single Democrat will come on and say that they're for border security. They are, except for one problem. Their vote does not match their rhetoric. And so, we're looking for compromise. I can tell you, I was with the president and his team yesterday. I saw Mick Mulvaney earlier this morning. They're looking for ways to make sure that we can get this done. Hopefully we will. But I can tell you, it seems like the Democrats have dug in and are trying to make sure that this shutdown lasts a lot longer than it should.
Well, I mean, you're looking at next week when the Senate resumes on the 27th. But what if it does? How are you going to get them to agree on the 27th? To come up with the money for the border wall? I mean, what happens if this goes into January? Don't you have a worse off situation once the Democrats take the majority in the new Congress?
Well, without a doubt, when the Democrats are in control of the House, certainly the 217 Republicans that voted with the president just a few days ago will be in the minority. But I think, it's all about having options. We spend billions of dollars. Maria, maybe this is a solution. We spend billions of dollars every year in improper payments. So maybe Senator Schumer would go with me and say anything that we recover that we can spend on the wall. That's one option that he wouldn't even have to appropriate. There are a number of options that wouldn't cost the American taxpayer money and yet would secure our border. I think cooler heads need to prevail.
Well, what are you negotiating at now in terms of numbers? The president said $5 billion. Is he willing to accept under $3 billion? What's the neighborhood that's being discussed right now?
Well, obviously, it's anywhere from $1.6 billion to $5 billion. I can tell you that there are a number of conservatives who believe that the $5 billion was already a concession. When you look at $25 billion to build a wall, we're already, the president's already come down to $5 billion. But yeah, there's room in there. There were conversations. Senator Graham, I was with him last night. He was talking to some of his Democrat colleagues, trying to find a compromise. But really what we've found is we've found a wall. It's on the Democrat side because they're not willing to do anything, and yet it's just not a position that's defensible.
Well, what about the language being used? I mean, Nancy Pelosi said a wall is immoral. Chuck Schumer said you're not going to get a wall next week, next month, next year. You're not going to get a wall. So now the language is changing to what? Steel slats? I mean, they don't want to call it what you're actually coming up with money for?
Well, the president heard that loud and clear. He actually rolled out a different type of barrier, a steel slat barrier, or we call them SSBs. But yet, you've got Nancy Pelosi, you've got Senator Schumer and others who voted for 700 miles of fencing. If they want to go ahead and appropriate the money for the other 350 miles that they didn't build on that 2006 legislation that they passed, we'll help them with that. This is not about what we call it. This is about what it is. And we need border security. The Democrats don't want it, and most Americans do.
But why would they not want it, Congressman? I mean, it sounds like crazy to hear you say they don't want border security. They say they do want border security. Why would they not want border security?
Well, I think what it is, it's all about one campaign promise. They know that this was a central theme for this president, and quite frankly, it was what ultimately made the day and why Democrats came over, unaffiliated came over, and voted for this president. They know that that was the central theme for part of his campaign, and they just don't want him to fulfill it. When we look at that, yes, they do say they're for border security, but they're for everything that doesn't matter. When it really gets to sanctuary cities or Kate's Law or a barrier or asylum reform, they're absolute no each and every time, and you can look at the voting record and verify that.
But I just find it really extraordinary that just last week you all passed a farm bill which cost $850 billion plus. And so they found the money for the farm bill, which I guess had some welfare in it as well, the $860 billion, but they can't come up with $5 billion for border security.
Well, Maria, you're exactly right. We have $5 billion in sugar subsidies in that very farm bill that they just put forth. But we're not talking about money. We're talking less than 1/2 of 1 penny in terms of what we're talking about in terms of money. The president has agreed with them on over $1 trillion of spending, and we're debating $5 billion.
Yeah.
It's just not a defensible position for the Democrats.
You're going to dig in. What does this mean for 2020, Congressman? Because the longer this goes on, the longer the government stays closed, the longer people call it the Trump shutdown, which is what Chuck Schumer came up with. Is this going to impact 2020 re-election for President Trump?
Well, it'll impact President Trump if he doesn't keep his campaign promises. I can tell you this, that when we're looking at this, we're there at the White House yesterday. The president was trying to make sure that it had minimal impact on federal employees, minimal impact on the American people, and say, how can we manage this in such a way that we stay firm and resolved, but that it doesn't have the negative implications. And actually, you're already starting to see this. You'll get all kinds of narratives out there, but this president is committed to making sure that that American citizens are first in his mind, and he keeps his campaign promise.
Real quick before you go, I've got to ask you the status of your investigation into the FBI and the DOJ. We know that once your colleagues get in there in the majority next year, these investigations are dead. Are we going to see any accountability for what took place during the 2016 election, where a couple of people from the FBI and the DOJ tried to stop Donald Trump in any ways that they could have?
Well, you've got John Ratcliffe coming on later. He's been very, very good on this particular issue. You've been very good on this issue. I can tell you that we're going to continue to do that. The Democrats are going to do away with any official hearings, but that doesn't stop members of Congress from conducting oversight. We'll continue to do that and make sure that people are held accountable. Quite frankly, there's so much there that the American people need transparency, and I think when that happens, it'll be good medicine for everybody.
Well, you've got the president's ear. Would you encourage the president to declassify those documents so the American people understand what took place?
I have and I will. And you know, listen, the president's typical default is on transparency. He believes that we ought to let the American people see it because he knows what he's done and what he hadn't done. And I do think that we will see declassified documents in the weeks and months to come. All
right. We will talk more about that with Congressman John Ratcliffe coming up, who's on the Judiciary Committee. Sir, it is good to see you this morning. We'll be watching the developments. Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Maria.
Congressman Mark Meadows joining us there. Our coverage of the partial government shutdown continues this morning with new reaction from lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. First, our Georgia Republican Senator David Perdue is with me, member of the Senate Budget Committee. He joins us for an exclusive interview now in the Senate hands. You can follow me on Twitter at Maria Bartiromo at Sunday Futures. Let us know what you'd like to hear from Senator as well as Congressman coming up. Stay with us. We're looking ahead on Sunday Morning Futures right now. McConnell sends his colleagues home for the Christmas holiday with no new partial government shutdown deal in sight. McConnell, for his part, had negotiated a stopgap funding bill through February 8th, which the president rejected. Georgia Republican Senator David Perdue joins me now in an exclusive interview. He sits on both the Senate Budget and Armed Services Committees. Good to see you, Senator. Thanks very much for joining us.
Good morning, Maria.
From your standpoint, where does this go from here?
Well, first of all, this is ridiculous, but the president's on this 24/7. I mean, this is the second Schumer shutdown we've had just this year. The president of the Democrats earlier this week had a deal at $1.6 billion for border security, and the Democrats walked away because Pelosi felt like the Republicans couldn't pass it in the House. And we not only passed it in the House, but we passed it a $5 billion border security package with $8 billion disaster relief. Remember, though, that just early this year, Democrats, 44 Democrats in the Senate, voted for a $25 billion border security package. So, Maria, this is not about a number. This is about the Democrats not wanting the president to actually follow through on his commitment to secure that southern border.
You're saying the 44 Democrats that voted for border security was what, in an immigration bill? When did
Absolutely.
they vote for?
Senator Collins had an immigration bill. It was up side by side. Senator Cotton and I had another bill up at the same time, and there was a $25 billion funding piece in that bill that 44 Democrats actually voted for. And honestly, disaster relief has also always been a bipartisan issue in the Senate. They're just trying to play politics with the security of our country, Maria, and the president's going to the mat on this one. But I will say this. I was on the phone with him last night for over an hour. I was in the White House Friday. We've convinced Vice President Pence and Mulvaney to get involved, and they've been brokering this. The Vice President was actually at the Capitol past 9:30 Friday night. He was over here yesterday. We had the Senate open. I actually presided for a little while in the Senate yesterday to keep it open to try to get to a solution this weekend.
So you think that they're just not agreeing to anything that even remotely sounds like or looks like a wall because it would be a campaign promise that this president actually delivered on? You think that's all this is about?
Maria, I had over half a dozen Senate Democrats tell me just Friday that if we called it anything but a wall, they'd be all for it. This is ridiculous. If President of the United States, President Trump, said he didn't want border security, he didn't want any money for the wall, the Democrats would be all over him telling him, oh no, we've got to do that. So this is all about resisting Trump and not taking care of the business that we have as a Senate. Let me remind your viewers, though, that the reason we're here with a partial shutdown, though, is because we stayed here in August and funded 75% of the budget this year, the discretionary budget, which includes defense, health, education, and other issues. What's remaining mostly is the Homeland Security piece, which is mostly essential. The other thing that your viewers should be comfortable with is that the payrolls that go out on the 28th of this month are going out no matter what. So independent of what we do this week, that payroll is going to be met. It just shows, though, that this president's trying this weekend to get to a deal with the Democrats.
Yeah, that's just incredible. So how does this play out in your view? I mean, do you think the government opens this upcoming week when the Senate gets back on Thursday? What's your expectation here?
I think we'll get to a deal this week. I talked to the president last night. He wants that. I think Senator Schumer has actually been dealing this week. It's just that at the end of the day, they backed up from what they had already agreed to. I'm hopeful that cooler heads will prevail. We'll get to some number between 1.6 and 5 billion on that. Nobody's arguing about the disaster relief package, so I think we're just about there. If we would both just recognize this is not about politics, it's about the security of our country.
So, in other words, you'll get to a deal likely more than 1.6, but less than 5, and you won't call it a wall. Is that
I don't care what we call it.
Right.
Yeah, I don't care what we call it. Neither does the president. The president's actually talking about different. But what we want is barriers, just like we see in other parts of the world. I was in Israel last year, and they have similar situation there, and they do that. Other countries do the same thing. And as a matter of fact, Maria, in most countries, the military has a responsibility for the sovereignty of their borders. In the United States, we have Homeland Security, so we give them the responsibility. But the military can have a play in this as well.
All right, we will leave it there. Senator, we'll be watching the developments. Really incredible content here. We will see you soon, sir. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Maria.
David Perdue. We will have more on this partial government shutdown coming up, as we just heard from 2 Republicans, 1 from each chamber. Coming up next, we get some fresh perspective from House Democrat David Cicilline. He is here. We will also have Texas GOP Congressman John Ratcliffe with us as we look ahead on Sunday Morning Futures right now. Minority Leader Chuck Schumer telling President Trump yesterday if he wants to fund the government, he must abandon the wall. Meanwhile, Democrats will become the majority in the House next month. Some speculate it could be on them to end this shutdown if it gets into the new year. We bring in now Rhode Island Congressman David Cicilline for an exclusive interview. He is the incoming chairman of the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee, making him a member of the Democratic House leadership. He is also a member of the House Judiciary Committee and House Foreign Affairs Committee. And Congressman, it's good to see you this morning.
Great to see you.
Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
First, let's talk about this wall. You heard what my past 2 guests said, that this is not about border security for you and your colleagues. This is about stopping the president from having a promise delivered.
Yeah, not at all. Look, it is not about border security because Democrats support border security. We appropriated in the last 2 years $1.6 billion for border security, and Democrats support that. We just think it should be done in a smart way. Use technology, use sensors, use drones, use more personnel, use it in a way that's effective. So I think what the opposition to this is not a campaign promise, but it's just not a good use of taxpayer money. Let's secure the borders in a cost-effective way using the best technology that will keep our borders safe.
Why would a barrier be the wrong way? Why not have a barrier? Barriers worked elsewhere. Barriers work elsewhere in other countries as well. Why would a barrier or a wall not work? I don't understand.
Well, maybe that some parts of a wall make sense. Some places it's fencing, some places it's drones, some places it's satellite. Let's the experts decide kind of how to best use it. But what the president's talking about is a $70 billion, 1,000-mile wall, which just doesn't make sense. And in fact, his own chief of staff, his incoming chief of staff, and his departing chief of staff both said this is a simplistic answer to a complicated problem. It won't work. So I think they're right. We've got to be smart about this. We've got to do it in a way which secures our borders, but doesn't squander $70 billion of taxpayer money just so the president can make good on a promise.
$5 billion.
No, but that's the beginning. It's a $70 billion wall. We ought not make a down payment of $5 billion on something that doesn't make sense.
Now, you just heard Senator David Perdue say that your team has already voted for this. In the immigration bill, you voted for a wall. You voted for border security. So now, because all of a sudden it's, the president keeping this campaign promise, build that wall,
yeah,
it's a different story.
The bill he's talking about related to border security, I believe. And I think Democrats have a long history of supporting investing in border security. In the last 2 years, we approved $1.6 billion. The administration has spent less than 6% of that. So this notion of this is urgent, I need the money. The president has $1.6 billion that he hasn't spent yet. So let's just be smart about it. Democrats are as committed to border security as Republicans. Of course we are.
You say you're committed to it, Congressman, pardon me, but you didn't vote for Kate's Law. You didn't vote for ending sanctuary cities. You're not voting for a border wall. So how can you justify saying, I am for border security when you haven't voted for it?
Because we have voted for border security, and I voted for border security. The reality is we want to be sure that we're investing in security that works. We have great technology. We can use drones. We can use satellites. We can do cargo inspections. Let's do things that the experts say will actually secure the border rather than wasting money on a very costly, ineffective physical wall that just won't provide the kind of security we need. We also need to deal with the underlying causes of immigration. We need to have additional personnel. We need to fix our broken immigration system. So there's a lot of work to be done here. But the idea that you can simply solve the problem by just putting up a wall just won't work.
Like catch and release, right? That's one issue that people talk about. Illegals come to this country, the U.S. catches them, but then you have to release them in order to get a court date.
Well,
do you support catch and release?
I think the important thing is we have asylum laws in this country. And fortunately, the United States Supreme Court just affirmed that, our asylum system is the crown jewel of our immigration system. It lets people who are fleeing violence and war and famine and unspeakable conditions.
But we don't know that all of those people
We don't know that, but we have a process where they can petition for asylum, then a court makes a determination. We have to keep those laws respected. They're part of our tradition. They're consistent with our international
But shouldn't those laws be protected in a legal structure?
Absolutely.
Rather than an illegal structure. I mean, your incoming leadership, incoming House Speaker Leader Nancy Pelosi has called this wall immoral. Watch this.
Most of us, speaking for myself, consider the wall immoral, ineffective, inexpensive. And the president said he promised it. He also promised Mexico would pay for it. So even if they did, it's immoral still, and then they're not going to pay for it.
Do you really think a wall is immoral?
I think what she said,
do you think a wall is immoral?
Ineffective, costly, and immoral. And I think what she means by that is it's not consistent with our values. We can have strong borders.
Well, do you keep your doors open all night?
No.
Do you keep your doors unlocked all night?
No one's saying we should let people in. We should, in fact, have border security, but we can do it in a way which is consistent with our values as a country. And so I think what the leader is saying is it's costly, it doesn't do the job, it's ineffective, and it really undermines our values, this idea of a physical barrier around our country.
Well, the values, are also based on the rule of law, and we have a legal structure in order to get into this country, because if you don't, you have a lot of illegals out there, and somebody has to pay for them. Where are you going to get the hundreds of billions of dollars needed that are required to pay for people for health care, for education, for food stamps, for all these programs that ultimately those people are going to need?
I don't know a single Democrat who doesn't think that we ought not have an organized system for people to come into this country legally. Every Democrat I know supports comprehensive immigration reform, supports our asylum system, supports additional personnel, additional resources. We voted for $1.6 billion to help secure the border. So there's no disagreement about that. The disagreement's really about this wall. And I think the truth is there's an easy deal to be had here. I don't think the president wants a deal. I think he wants a government shutdown. He said it himself. I think he's dealing with a Secretary of Defense who just rebuked him and left. He's dealing with a difficulty finding a chief of staff. The stock market tanking.
How
he's dealing
far?
with. So I think he has a lot of things he's trying to distract from, and he's not anxious to reopen the government.
How long are you willing to go to the mat for this? I mean, are you expecting a deal in the next week to open this government, the rest of the government, by Thursday or Friday?
I hope so. As I said, I think this is easy to do. The Senate already voted for a continuing resolution, 100-1. The president said he would support it. It would pass the House if the president supported it. What changed? The president's world is starting to kind of crash on him. And so he says, I'm going to shut the government down. What are we talking about today? We're talking about the government shutdown. Mission accomplished for the president. So I don't think he has a big interest. I think when Democrats take back the House, we will swiftly move to reopen that government.
Let me ask you about when the Democrats take over, because 40 of your colleagues have written to the leadership saying, we don't want all of this bluster and investigative processes going on. We want real legislation. We want to do the work that the American people want us to do. And yet we're talking about the president's tax returns, shutting down the FBI and the DOJ investigation, where we know that there was FISA abuse, etc. So what are you going to focus on once you get there?
Well, when I, along with Hakeem Jeffries and Sherry Bustos, we put together the Democratic agenda for this last election cycle that demonstrated we were for the people of this country, committed to driving down healthcare costs, particularly the cost of prescription drugs, rebuilding the infrastructure of our country, raising family incomes, and taking on the serious corruption in Washington. We're going to deliver on those three promises. We also have a responsibility to do oversight, but I can tell you our first priority is going to be to get the work done for the American people.
All right. So what's your priority once you take over in the next month?
I hope we're going to start off with a big democracy reform bill to help get money out of politics, to raise ethical standards, to get Washington working for the people again and not for the special interests.
But we know that this is really all about 2020, this border fight right now. Are you considering what all of this means in terms of your constituents going into the next election in 2 years?
Yeah, my constituents want want us to be sure that we're fulfilling all of our responsibilities, including securing our border, fixing our broken immigration system, but they expect us to do it in a smart way, a cost-effective way, and I have confidence that we'll get that done.
Congressman, it's great to have you on the program.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
My pleasure.
We'll be watching the developments. Congressman David Cicilline there. Coming up next, House Homeland Security Committee member John Ratcliffe will give us his thoughts on the partial government shutdown. Plus, we will discuss the resignation of Defense Secretary Jim Mattis with retired four-star General Jack Keane as we look ahead on Sunday Morning Futures right here. Back in a moment. Shutdown continues this morning with the battle over the border wall funding being a bone of contention between President Trump and the Democrats. Joining me right now in an exclusive interview is Texas Congressman John Ratcliffe, member of the House Judiciary Committee and House Homeland Security Committee. He's also a former federal prosecutor. Congressman, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Morning, Maria.
How far are you and your colleagues willing to go on this, do you think, in terms of the border wall? What can you tell us about the current negotiations and how close the Republicans are with the Democrats to actually getting the funding to open the government again?
Well, Maria, I think it's important for people to remember the primary reason that we have a federal government is to provide for the common defense. And part of that is securing the sovereignty and integrity of our territorial borders. That's why Donald Trump made it his #1 campaign promise and why Republicans are united behind him and voted to support the construction of a border wall this week by voting for $5 billion towards that. So it's very important. It's what we told people we would do. I think we need to take it as far as due respect. They keep saying they're for border security, but they keep voting against it. And so I hope that changes because the American people are suffering as a result of this the longer this shutdown goes.
What about the idea that, like David Cicilline just said, drones and more technology and more border agents, they're basically saying the wall in and of itself is ineffective.
Well, he's right about a layered approach. I mean, it's not just a wall everywhere. We do need to take advantage of technologies, but they have made this a political issue to say that a wall is immoral and that they won't support it. As you pointed out, Maria, we've proven that it works. The wall between San Diego and Tijuana is incredibly important with respect to enforcing our immigration laws in this country. So, the bottom line is this. Congressman Cicilline kept bringing up they were willing to spend $1.6 billion. As you pointed out, Maria, last week, 234 out of 237 Democrats in the House and the Senate voted to spend $867 billion on a farm bill. And this week, $5 billion is too much to spend for the #1 priority of the federal government. Border security. That
is a really important point that you make. And the Farm Bill was really debated throughout business and politicos because there's welfare in that bill as well. It's not just helping the farmers. But let me move on to another big issue on your plate, and that is last week you came face to face with Jim Comey. You have been investigating the DOJ and the FBI for more than a year now over their activity and behavior in the 2016 election. I want to show that your tweet that you put out after you spoke with Jim Comey, and you basically said, yes, this is the real transcript of my exchange with Jim Comey. No, I did not make this up. What are you trying to say here?
Well, Maria, first of all, I have to probably confess to your viewers that when it comes to Jim Comey, I've probably lost my objectivity because I was one of the folks that was defending him 2 years ago. But exchanges like this transcript really demonstrate that Jim Comey's FBI, the disparity and the dichotomy with which he treated two different presidential candidates. Folks that were associated with Hillary Clinton benefited from departures from FBI policies and procedures, and folks associated with Donald Trump had those departures work to their disadvantage. The words on the paper make very clear that when, for instance, folks associated with Hillary Clinton lied to the FBI, they weren't prosecuted, they were given immunity. Whereas we've seen this week what happened to General Flynn for lying to the FBI. Lying to the FBI is a serious crime. You should be prosecuted. But folks on both sides of the aisle should be prosecuted the same way. We saw repeatedly that Jim Comey was not willing to do that.
Right. And so what you wrote in your tweet is, okay, so I guess as I try to summarize what I've heard here today, Hillary Clinton mishandled classified information more than 100 times. She made false statements about it. The FBI was aware that at least one of her aides States also mishandled classified information. And one of the folks employed on behalf of Secretary Clinton intentionally destroyed evidence known to be subject to a congressional subpoena and preservation order and lied to the FBI about it. You go on then and say, and then on July 5th, 2016, you stood before the American people and said that neither you nor any reasonable prosecutor would bring any charges in this fact pattern. Is that accurate? And he answers you to say, yep, I believed it then and I believe it now.
Yeah, Maria, you have folks come on this show and try and spin things. The reason I put that out there is that's the actual transcript. That's really what he said in response to my question. And the American people have a hard time reading that and believing it. And it's why they're so upset with the disparity in how folks are being treated.
We still haven't seen accountability. I'll ask you again, and I know that I've asked you a lot this year. Will there be accountability to those people who've actually tried to change the vote of the American people?
Well, Maria, when I was a federal prosecutor, I had the ability to get subpoenas issued and bring people before a grand jury and try and seek indictments. I can't do that as a member of Congress. What I can do is what's reflected in that tweet. Create a transcript, create a record for the prosecutors to follow up there. There is enough there for people at the Department of Justice to follow up here and hold folks accountable. We've done what we can. Yes, the Democrats are about to take control of the House, but they can't make these transcripts go away. That's why Congressman Gowdy and myself and others have worked so hard to create a record that hopefully folks at the Department of Justice can use to provide that accountability. Yep. There's more than enough there for them to accomplish that.
Well, either that or the president has to declassify. We will see what
and he should.
And we will see what the incoming AG does, the Attorney General. Thanks so much. Good to see you, Congressman. Thank you.
Merry Christmas, Maria.
And to you, Merry Christmas, Congressman John Ratcliffe. Coming up, Cardinal Timothy Dolan has a Christmas message that ties into the debate over immigration. Plus, General Jack Keane is up next on the resignation of Defense Secretary Jim Mattis. Back in a moment.